Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome back to Royal Academy Book Club, starting our new book, The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin. I'm Atherton Wing, and these are my co-hosts, Dilga and Morbite. How are you guys doing today?
So I'm doing pretty well. Super ready to talk about this book. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, it's a good one, right? I think all three of us have read this one already. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
First one I read, you suggested to me.
But I don't know. It seems like if we were to kind of summarize what the book is about, right? I think it's a book about Josh Waitzkin, who is both a Tai Chi Chuan push hands many time world champion, and also chess grandmaster, world champion again several times. I don't know. He made it very, very big in both chess and Tai Chi, which are things that most people would consider to be pretty far apart from each other. And so it's his kind of autobiographical book that goes over his process of learning both of these things and the connections that he made between them and a lot of his mental models and these sorts of things. We also have read Peak together. The VODs for that will be up on my Twitch channel as well. So we may be referencing things from Peak, and we'll also probably be referencing things quite a bit from The Mental Game of Poker by Jared Tundler, which we may refer to as MGOP. But yeah, the idea of the show here is that we're going to read the book, we're going to discuss it each week, and kind of talk about how it relates to League of Legends and learning games in general, I'd say. So without any further ado, let's get right into it, right? So The opening quote of the book is, "One has to investigate the principle in one thing or one event exhaustively. Things and the self are governed by the same principle. If you understand one, you understand the other, for the truth within and the truth without are identical." Cheng Yishu, 11th century. I thought this was a really interesting way to kind of open the book, because it does a kind of a good job of communicating the theme of the whole thing, which is kind of this duality, right? That if you can learn to do one thing, then you can kind of learn to do everything, because the learning process itself remains roughly the same across different disciplines or different fields, right? So yeah, the chapter. So the introduction begins kind of going with a kind of an overview of Josh's life story. Right, he trained for many years to be good at chess. Searching for Bobby Fischer came out. It's a movie about his early chess life. It's pretty good. I kind of recommend seeing it. Have either of you seen it?
Nope.
I've never seen it, no.
It's actually quite good. We should probably do a thing where we watch it together. That would be pretty fun.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good, yeah.
But yeah, he spent a lot of his early life kind of learning chess, and then this movie comes out and it just hits him like a truck, celebrity status. All of a sudden he's got girls asking him to sign his stomach, and he's like, wait a second, I can't focus. This is ridiculous, right? He discovered the Tao Te Ching, and that got him interested in Buddhist and Taoist philosophy as kind of a way to center himself and remain focused, right? And he started taking Tai Chi Chuan lessons at William C.C. Chen's studio, and as he got deeper and deeper into Tai Chi Chuan, he started to notice more and more similarities and connections to chess, as though there were principles that seemed to kind of work the same in both disciplines. He says, "My growth became defined by barrierlessness," emphasis his. "Pure concentration didn't allow thoughts or false constructions to impede my awareness, and I observed clear connections between different life experiences through the common mode of consciousness by which they were perceived." So, to me, this sounded a lot like flow, right? A lot like flow and a lot like transfer learning. So
I'm not so sure about flow, but transfer learning there.
So the reason that I see flow in this is again, kind of look at the wording, right? Like, pure concentration didn't allow thoughts or false constructions to impede my awareness, right? And it's this idea that, I mean, I guess, skipping it forward a little bit, right? He talks about, in the third quote that I have here, he says, "In both my chess and martial arts lives, there's a method of study that has been critical to my growth. I sometimes refer to it as the study of numbers to leave numbers, or form to leave form. Basic example of this process, which applies to any discipline, can be easily illustrated through chess. A chess student must initially become immersed in the fundamentals in order to have any potential to reach a high level of skill. He or she will learn the principles of endgame, middle game, and opening. Initially, one or two critical themes will be considered at once, but over time, the intuition learns to integrate more and more principles into a sense of flow. Eventually, the foundation is so deeply internalized that it is no longer consciously considered, but is lived. This process continually cycles along as deeper layers of the art are soaked in." So, if we were to go back to the mental game of poker, right, and the adult learning model in particular, right, it's literally just like the process of moving something from conscious competence into unconscious competence, right?
Yeah. That is.
And
if
yeah, what's up?
If I may interject here, sorry.
Yes.
I kind of agree with you about the description of that quote being on flow, and the reason I do is because I've done a lot of research, I think, into, sort of what it means to be in quote-unquote flow, and a lot of these ancient Japanese and Chinese sort of philosophies tend to have to do a lot with flow, Zen, Kyoto, and they always talk about this idea of concentration being like sort of all-encompassing, where it's like it's not that you lose everything, it's that like they consider it as mind and body being together, as in that it's not that you're on autopilot, it's that you are doing things, and it's almost like you're an observer of sorts. So it's like you're conscious of what's going on, and you can kind of give input, but realistically, it's like kind of like your body's in control almost.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like your attention is so much on what you're doing, how you feel, what you see, what you smell, that there's no room for self-doubt, sort of, any other extraneous thoughts about what's for dinner.
higher abstractions,
right.
And
so it's like maybe inner game of poker or inner game of tennis's self-to-focus mode, the sort of relaxed concentration is sort of how I reconcile those things together. If you consider it as a relaxed concentration, then it tends to, I think, make more sense, because I think a lot of us, if you ask us, hey, are there any times where you were really well focused, but it wasn't like hyper focused, like tunnel vision? It was like you were kind of just relaxed and having a good time and just really concentrated. Your mind was quiet. You were just kind of doing the thing. We could all probably point to examples in our lives where that's happened.
Yeah. And
the martial arts fields are all about bringing those moments out more often and how to prolong them.
Yeah. And I don't know, I think you bring up a really interesting point, right? Which is this idea of like autopilot versus flow, right? Because a lot of people talk about, kind of not being in control, and like your subconscious takes over, and that's a lot of what autopilot is. But then people talk about this deep focus and this deep, intense concentration that comes with flow. And so I think a lot of times you'll see sort of both of them kind of presented side by side, where like, in both, right, your conscious mind is not really like at the center, right? But in flow, it's like seen as like a really good thing, and it's sort of different, and I don't know. I just wanted to kind of draw that contrast, because I think that's really good.
One of the things that I've been kind of starting to grasp the idea of is the attentional focus as being not a product of flow, but what causes flow. So it's like I'm thinking back, and it's like I'm realizing that when I'm on autopilot, my attention band, so to speak, is very narrow. I'm hyper focused on one thing, like say the minion in front of me. Whereas if I'm in the flow, then my attention is more wide and relaxed. A book I'm reading called Open Focus talks about narrow focus as being what we do when we're stressed out, and then wide focus is what we do when we're relaxed. And so, like, when you think about it like that, then it kind of makes sense to think autopilot is when my focus is narrow, and I'm so focused on what I see right in front of me that nothing else is basically triggering stimuli at all or any sort of response. Whereas flow might be you're kind of just taking everything in all at once, and you're able to sort of process that all,
Interesting.
If that makes sense at all.
Yeah, no, it totally does, and it brings up kind of another really commonly sort of brought up term in League, which is tunnel vision, right? Like, I tunneled on the CS and I got killed, right? Or I tunneled on the person I was trying to kill in the team fight and then I got whacked, right? Like, and I think you're, like, it really seems to me like you've kind of hit upon something important, right? It's like the scope of the focus, I think, has a really big impact in terms of whether it brings you into autopilot or whether it brings you into flow. So, yeah, I really like that. And two, that speaks to that same quote that I was kind of bringing up, right? My growth became defined by barrierlessness, right? If there's no barrier between you and the environment around you, and your focus is really wide, then that's what's going to get you into flow, right? So, yeah, I think a lot of this book is going to be about his experiences with flow and the connections between flow in chess and flow in Tai Chi, and the importance of unconscious competence for making sure that your flow experiences are producing high levels of performance in both, right?
And then when you think about it, it's like when things are unconscious competence, they're familiar and they don't feel stressful to do. Whereas, like, if you're learning something brand new, it makes sense for it to be kind of stressful that you're trying to focus on it, so you start sort of hyper-focusing on it and autopiloting everything else.
Yeah.
And then as you get more comfortable with it, you're able to widen your breadth of focus a little bit more, and then it becomes a part of your flow. And so it's like this sort of idea of autopilot and flow being a state of how wide your attention is starting to really kind of click with me, I think.
Yeah. I like it a lot. Anyone have anything else that they noticed in the introduction? Shall we move on to chapter 1?
Nope.
I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a lot of foreshadowing.
Yeah.
He's doing the thing.
Indeed. So in chapter 1, he begins as most stories do at the beginning, with him as a little kid, 6-year-old, and he plays. He gets really interested in playing speed checks in Central Park with a bunch of ne'er-do-wells, hustlers, drug addicts, genius homeless people. He gives some very interesting descriptions of these folks, but it seems like a very playful, very unstructured kind of an introduction to chess, which reminds me a lot of how they talked about the opening stages of Mastery and Peak, right?
Exactly.
I was like reading that and I was like, oh my god, it's actually just like textbook, right?
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood something. I'm not entirely sure. Can you repeat what the discovery was?
He goes into Central, sees a chessboard with people playing over it, and he just finds the pieces moving, because they are hustlers, so they are playing really, really fast chess. And he just finds it enrapturing at first, and then he comes back a few days later and sees an old man. He comes up, if you want to play.
Right, I remember that part.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
And so, yeah, the idea was just that kind of an introduction, just like an innate curiosity, and he doesn't really know how to play, and they start to teach him, and he starts to kind of get it, right? Like that sort of an introduction. he talks about the chess pieces seeming like a jungle, right? And there's something mysterious and alien and powerful about them. And just the shape of them is just really, they kind of capture him, right? And it reminds me a lot of the way that they describe those chess grandmasters in Peak, where they like found the chessboard in the closet, and they had a very similar experience where it's just the shape of the pieces is just really interesting. And you're like, what are these for? How do we use them?
It's kind of like an absorption in sort of the visual and the tactile feel of the chessboard.
Yeah, and that kind of an introduction
because of their form
is what gets somebody really into chess. You don't start with a chessboard and all the pieces arranged, and you're like, "This is chess, and we're going to play it." That's not what gets people interested in it, right? What gets people interested in it is, "Oh, what is this?"
Cool.
Yeah, right. And it's driven by curiosity, right? And that curiosity is always kind of the first step in mastery, right? Like they talk about in the opening stages of Peak.
I'd go further and say that it's curiosity and the ability to like manipulate, touch the thing, literally.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
True. Yeah, just getting familiar with the physical objects involved in the activity, right?
Yeah. Touching when you're a kid, touching things, the main.
Basically. I mean, that struck true with me and music as well. Starting with a little dinky 2-octave keyboard that I had when I was like 10 years old. So sort of like same sort of experience with me, where it was kind of like I kind of started late, but kind of my mom got me that little keyboard, and then I was like, "Oh, this is kind of cool." Start dinking around on it, and then and then like figured out I could play certain songs if I like guessed the notes and stuff, and that was pretty sick.
Yeah, that's really fun. And like, I mean, I'm sure all of us can recount how we, got into computers and then eventually got into League of Legends, right? And it's the same kind of an experience, right? I mean, like, I computers were around me from a very, very young age.
Same.
I think I was playing video games with my dad when I was 6, right? I'm talking like, Myst and Diablo, right? Like, those were the things that I grew up on. So,
one of my earliest memories is playing Super Mario Brothers 3 with my brother.
Yeah, right.
I had to have him help me beat some levels because I was too young to beat them.
Yeah.
And something that we really bonded over, for sure.
Must be this old to beat. Like it. But yeah, so to quote the text, he says, "I learned quickly that when I thought about the people watching, I played badly." Right? For context, he started getting pretty good pretty fast, and he started beating some of the adults in the park, and that would draw a crowd, right? So I learned quickly that when I thought about people watching, I played badly. It was hard for a 6-year-old Ham to ignore throngs of adults talking about him. But when well focused, I seemed to hover in an in-between state where the intensity of the chess position mixed with the rumble of voices, traffic noises, ambulance sirens, all in an inspiring swirl that fueled my mind. And to actually kind of dip into Mental Game of Poker 2, I feel like this is some early flow experiences, but not really all that well understood or well controlled, right? It's like sometimes he gets into flow, sometimes he doesn't, and he doesn't really know what's causing it or when, but he knows that he definitely knows that thinking about people watching him takes him out of flow, and it brings him into this sense of like, oh, like, now I have to, do something for other people, right? Performing as opposed to exploring and having a good. So
and that makes sense, right? Because it's like when you have stimuli that stresses you out, like a bunch of adults talking about you or watching you, and you aren't comfortable with it, it's going to be really hard to keep your focus really well sort of centered on what you're trying to look at. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's very true for me too, even.
Yeah, and I think this is why, among other reasons, right? This is why streaming often makes people play worse, right? I don't think I've seen a single streamer that says that they play better on stream than they do off stream, right? People watching you is going to get into your head, and even more than that, right? Trying to entertain people is going to split your focus, right? And so you're never going to have that good of a time really, really deeply learning the game if you're streaming. It's going to make it slower.
And then you even think that, like, even the guys who play really well on stream while interacting, it's because they're either very used to interacting or, you know, they've gotten all the skills really, really well learned so that they can kind of still, you know, sort of split their
totally
focus and still be in
confidence.
the flow. Yeah.
Or that they are playing against massively weaker opponents.
Yeah,
you know.
That too. People do smurf.
No, that's the thing. Yeah, when you smurf, it's much easier to like be able to entertain and play well at the same time.
Yeah.
And that kind of explains why a lot of streamers kind of prefer the smurfing while they're streaming in a lot of ways.
Well,
and
there's that, and
it's also just more entertaining to watch, right?
Well, it's because it's harder for them to do stomp on high-elo games when they're not streaming, and streaming makes it even harder. So, and people enjoy watching.
Yeah, nobody likes watching somebody struggle in high elo. They want to see them smash in low elo, right? Like,
yeah.
I want people in chat being, baby rage, I want the one shot. Give me the one shot, right? Like, that's, you know, I don't want to watch people go up 10 CS in lane. That's boring. Yikes. But yeah, so soon after, he meets Bruce Pendolfini, a master level player and chess teacher, who becomes interested in coaching him. He says, our first lessons were anything but orthodox. We hardly studied chess. Bruce knew it was more important for us to get to know one another and to establish a genuine camaraderie, right? Again, I made the connection to Peak, right? It totally parallels what they talk about in terms of the proper way for a first coach to act, right? They talked a lot about it being really important that they're very genuine, very supportive, very encouraging, and very playful, and make sure that and that they understand that their primary job isn't actually to educate the kid to become an incredible player, but first to develop their internal motivation, right? To make them really love the activity. And it seems like Bruce was somebody who understood that and who, to use league terminology, played around it, right?
And I mean, you can kind of tell how much he really loves the guy just from the way he talks about him.
Oh yeah, 100%.
So, like, I think that's really cool.
Clearly, this was a very influential figure in his early childhood, and somebody who he really looked up to.
Definitely. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah. So
having a Grandmaster chess as your first chess teacher really is...
it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
You know, when you want to deliberately practice, there's probably nothing better.
Yeah, right? You know, so in a lot of ways, you know, we gotta acknowledge that this is like right place, right time, right? You know, like of all of the people to be watching a young kid who happens to get interested in chess in the park, that it's like, you know, master level chess player that was, you know, the caster for the most influential match of the century. That's kind of insane, right? So, yeah, so he starts training with Bruce, and he says, Bruce decided that we should have knockdown, drag-out speed chess matches like the ones I was used to in the park. Whenever I made a fundamental error, he would mention the principle I had violated. If I refused to budge, he'd proceed to take advantage of the error until my position fell apart. Over time, Bruce earned my respect as I saw the correctness of his ideas, right? And especially when you're working with younger players or with these people who may be resistant, who have, as Josh had, picked up some bad habits playing in lower skill games. This is a really fantastic way to bring them out of those habits and bring them out of that mindset, right? If you're right, prove it, bruh. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
extremely effective. So
yeah,
just there's nothing that works better. Because it's genuinely a matter of perspective that they don't word it.
Yeah. And it's not like he's like arrogant, right? He's super young, doesn't have the experiences.
Yeah.
He's just kind of there. And it's like when you're
no, I think this works, and he's like, no, it doesn't. Try it. And he's like, ooh.
It's like when you're at that age and you get a lot of sort of like really positive, I think, in the positive in the wrong way sort of feedback. It stops becoming about how hard you work and about how smart you are. And that's sort of the path I think Josh might have been on until his teacher was kind of like, hey, I mean, let's just let's just all calm down, and and I think him having that sort of fallback.
Yeah, please try hustling me and see how to.
Yeah. Allow me to explain.
It's got to be ego boosting to be 7-year-old playing chess and beating adults. Because you when you're that young, you look up to adults as being capable of pretty much doing anything. So it's like you think you beat adults, you must be really good. But those adults probably are maybe low tournament level versus Grandmaster. The Grandmaster's gonna show you a different reality, and so it's really kind of cool. And I didn't really have that kind of feedback, so it took me a long time to sort of.
Oh, I think the amount of people that get this kind of feedback are very few and far between.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And I gotta say also, shout out to Josh's parents, right? For allowing him to continue to play in the park and supporting him in this early passion that he got interested in. How many people would just be like, no, there's a bunch of drug dealers and hustlers, we're not going back there, right? Absolutely insane. That his parents are supportive in this situation, right? That's really, really cool, right? And if you're raising kids, right, support their interests, right? Just if they get interested in something, don't stifle it. God, just let them grow into it, right?
Well, just make sure that he's safe. He mentions that they were cleaning up then when they were when the kid was.
Yes. No, they weren't continuing to be bad guys. They understood that this was the thing, right? But yeah. He goes on to say, fortunately, Bruce's educational philosophy fit my character perfectly. He didn't present himself as omniscient, and he handled himself more as a guide in my development than as an authority. If I disagreed with him, we would have a discussion, not a lecture. Again, I think this is super duper duper important, right? Especially as a kid who doesn't have the experience to know why authority should be given, right, to somebody who knows more than you. It's
because he's a master chess player, but it doesn't make sense.
Kid doesn't know what it means to be a master chess player. You know what I mean? He doesn't have any idea how big or deep the game is, and so he doesn't have any idea why he should give respect or why he should just listen, right? And so he gave him a reason. Yeah, right. Give him a reason. Come down, talk to him like a peer, right? And also too, I mean, this is going to get him to understand the principles much better than any kind of a lecture ever would, right? He goes on to say a little later, right? When I made a bad move, Bruce asked me what my idea was, and then helped me discover how I could have approached the decision-making process differently, right? Super duper important, right? It all comes back to this idea of making sure that you're not just giving the guy a fish, right? But teaching him to fish, right? And this kind of an approach where you have discussions, you take a look at decisions that you as a coach disagree with, and you say, okay, what was your idea there? These are really, really, really important things for the students coming to both have faith that the things that they're doing and that they're experimenting with, that experimenting is good, right? If you totally just crap on people for making decisions that you think are wrong or bad, right? Then you stifle any sense of exploration that they may have and any desire for them to continue to experiment, right? And these are the sorts of things that as they get higher and higher in skill level are going to really come back to bite them. Because if you don't have somebody that knows how to experiment and come to conclusions themselves, then they become dependent on you as a coach, and not they aren't actually able to continue to progress once they reach kind of the edge of your ability, right? And so, really, really, really important and valuable thing that this guy is doing. I really like it.
One of the things that I sort of really kind of took away from this is, as Aetherton knows, I read this book recently called The Power of Mindful Learning, and sort of what they talked about is, opening your mind to perspectives and sort of changing sort of the language versus, having an absolute idea of what a rule of something is into something more that sort of guides your opinions and it gets you to think. And this is kind of what the coach was doing with Josh, was kind of giving him a more mindful learning approach, where it's like,
yes.
What's your idea here? And what are some common ways that we can beat that? And what are common ways you can beat that? And sort of like really kind of getting really deep into the sort of like the commons, the sort of commons and why they're built up that way, as opposed to just saying, you don't do that because you have to control the center.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, but that doesn't really, sort of get at his thought process of why he felt like he didn't want to control the center, or, whatever.
Yeah.
And so that sort of like reaffirmed, I think, part of the issues I had, where I kind of was just accepting rules to accept rules rather than questioning why they were a thing, and sort of like what are the common moves that come out of those rules and fundamentals and sort of things. So that was really cool to see.
Yeah, and I think that you've hit on a really, really important thing that is just, for any student or any coach, right? The number one thing that you can do that's going to make your improvement go faster and further is to ask questions, right? And I mean, I know that like people talk about that in school all the time, but like it's for a good reason, right? Like, if you ask questions, then the process of going through and figuring out the answers for yourself and exploring different options and all of that, like that is what allows you to come to a deep and nuanced understanding of a subject, as opposed to a surface level fact regurgitation one, right? And if you don't ask questions, then you're never going to go further than whatever discussion happens around the initial kind of move, right? You're fixing that one move that you made rather than the whole suite of moves that you would have made based on the principle that you had that caused you to make that move, right? It's,
exactly.
Yeah, you're not when you're trying to learn, right? And this is especially true in League of Legends, right? If you have a coach and you're a student, right, and your coach points out like something that they think is a mistake, right? Super duper common, that happens all the time, right? Like, in fact, most coaching that you're going to receive in the League of Legends space is just going to be people reviewing your VOD and pointing out all sorts of mistakes that you made, right? So the wrong way to approach that sort of an experience is to say, okay, next time I won't do that, right? What does that mean, really, right? Because in that game, you had a complex set of mental models that caused you to come to the conclusion that that was the right move. You didn't do it because you were dumb, or it's like you came to that conclusion for a reason, right? And if you don't understand what that reason is, then how are you going to be able to correct it in the future, right? So you need to identify why you made the decision that you did, and then how can you change your decision-making process in order to make the decision that the coach might think was correct, right? You were saying,
also, like, not like there are a billion ways to make the wrong move, but like only a few ways to make the right move. So saying don't do that doesn't it doesn't tell you what to do.
Yeah,
it doesn't go to the heart of the problem.
One of the things that I always tell people in this server when they're having issues with the way they frame goals, and I always say, hey, I want you to not think about a pink elephant. Do not think about a pink elephant.
Yeah.
And the first thing that's going to happen is what?
You're going to think about the pink elephant. Yeah.
You're going to think about the pink elephant. So it's like when you tell somebody don't miss CS. they're imagining all the ways in which they missed the CS and then saying, don't do that. They're never imagining, how do I actually get the CS? So what it ends up doing is just sort of mentally rehearses failure or mediocrity in that sense. So when we tell students not to do something, it's always going to be better to say, hey, make sure you hit the minion when it's at low health versus don't miss the minions, right? And I think that's super important too. That's a good point to bring up.
Yeah, for sure. Phrasing corrections and goals in the affirmative rather than the negative is
yeah, that's a good way to put it, for sure.
Super duper important, I think. Yeah. So he continues to say, Bruce slowed me down by asking questions. Whenever I made an important decision, good or bad, he would ask me to explain my thought process. Were there other ways to accomplish the same aim? Had I looked for my opponent's threats? Did I consider a different order of operations? I think these 3 questions are so good. Oh my god, you can apply this in literally like any situation in League of Legends to a tremendous effect.
That's sort of what I was starting to do in those other replays when I came to you and I was like, oh my god, I'm so big brained, and figured out why we leave leashes at 136 and not some other time. Yeah. It wasn't an arbitrary decision. It's not.
No.
And I always thought it was. And so when I did that, I was like, oh my lord.
What?
I'm on my way to challenge your boys.
Yeah. For reference, why is it? Why do we leave leashes at 136?
Because it takes 15 seconds for the first melee minions to die, and so if you leave after 136, you risk getting there after the minions die, and then you lose full control over the wave. So you have a window of 6 seconds to leash, and if you take any longer than that, you handicap. Yeah, you handicap yourself, sort of.
To add a bit of depth right here, the reason there's also the second camp, like only for red buff, but the Krugs camp doesn't spawn right away. So if you stay longer to leave, the buff ends up dying faster. You don't actually end up helping you.
That's a point I hadn't even considered.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I'm not sure I understood what you meant.
Krugs don't spawn at the same time as the first, right? And Krugs are often the best because of the on the.
You're cutting out a little bit.
I thought they respawned late to stop bot lanes from taking them.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That was the reason.
But if you leash too long, then even the extra speed that your jungler gets from you having leashed longer doesn't actually help them clear their jungle faster because they get to the Krug camp and it hasn't spawned yet.
Right. Cool. So that's
you don't even have to feel bad.
Way to fix that.
Yeah, you don't even have to feel bad. So yeah, that's definitely a big thing. And the other thing too is if you get to lane before the minions die, if you're not even in XP range, then you're gonna like hit a level break point slower than your opponent, and that can be really, really difficult to deal with too. So just that is an important thing as well. It's not just the wave control; you're also potentially losing experience with his, which is game-breakingly bad. That is unbelievably bad.
Right. That's those 2 reasons are definitely it. But like, that's when I realized that even staying a half a second longer than like leaving right at 136 can actually just completely mess things up.
Yes.
For you. So I've had a lot more success at level 1s leaving right as the clock turns 136. So so that's been really cool. Just from that sort of like line of questioning too. So super excited to keep using that sort of thing.
Yeah. So, if you're watching this and you want to improve your game, take a look at moments that you died, right, in your game, and ask yourself these questions, right? What were you trying to do? Were there other ways that you could have done the same thing? Did you take were there any threats that your opponent had that you didn't take into account? And had you considered a different order of operations, right? Maybe this is your goal and you decided to go straight for it. Were there other things that you could have done in between, or should you have tried to do it later? Timing. And, I think you're going to find some really interesting stuff based on that. So to continue on, he says, while the new knowledge was valuable, the most important factor in these first months of study was that Bruce nurtured my love for chess, and he never let technical material smother my innate feeling for the game. And this is most important, I think, because to bring back to Peak, right? And kind of the whole conclusion of that book, right? Practice has a larger effect on your overall performance ability than any other factor, right? And as such, motivation to continue to practice, and to continue to study, and to continue to learn is, in many ways, like the single biggest predictor of a student's potential success in the field, right? And so making sure that as somebody's first coach, or somebody's or even as a fresh student coming in, right, that you know why League of Legends is fun for you, and that you make sure to preserve that as you continue to hone your game, is going to be unbelievably important moving forward, right? So this is, a lot of times, people ask me, and I think this is a question that every coach is going to get asked at least 8 billion times by the time they finish their career, right? What champion should I play? The champion that you should play is the one that you enjoy the most. Because the one that you enjoy the most is the one that you're going to be most motivated to continue to play and continue to practice on. It doesn't matter which champion you pick, it just matters that you pick one, right? Find the one that you like the best and stick with it. Start with 20 games. If you can do 20 games in a row with the same champion, you are well on your way to understanding that champion at a very deep level. But if you're playing a different champion every single game, you are going to get basically nowhere in terms of learning them, right? So motivation is unbelievably important. Making sure that you have that.
I found that this is the one aspect of the League of Legends coaching community that I really like, is that whenever somebody's new on like Summoner School or any other coaching site, whenever they're like, hey, I'm new and I want to get good at this game, what do I do? And they're like, don't worry about getting good, just play for now. Figure out what you like, figure out what you don't like, just have fun for a while. Once you get to level 30 and you feel like, you have a pretty decent grasp of, at least some fundamentals, then we can...
you realize that you don't, and we can show you around.
Exactly. Some grasp of anything, like even if you only know how to push even if you literally only know how to control your character,
that's
even something like that takes quite a long time to actually habituate.
It's true.
So that's the one aspect of the League of Legends community for coaching that I really, really like.
True.
And you spoke to another point, though, is the one that I vehemently disagree with, not with you, but with the community's ideas in general, where you talk about the champion you should play is the champion you like. A lot of people will be like, no, you just play something super easy, so that way you can learn the game and not the champion. Where it's like, yeah, maybe it'll take you longer to learn a fun champion, but, what's taking a little bit longer versus having a lot more fun, right?
And
so
what's taking a little bit longer versus playing for a whole lot?
Because, I know that a lot of people who will take that advice and just play nothing but Annie.
Yeah.
I'm not one of them. I really liked playing Annie. I have like 30,000 points on it, but a lot of people are like, I want to not be alive
I
anymore.
want to die.
Yeah. And that's really not the way to do it.
Which one is going to make you better at League of Legends? Playing 10 games of Annie and then quitting the game, or playing 400 games of Yasuo and still being pretty mediocre at Yasuo, but by God, you played 400 games of him, right? Like, I'm guarantee you the 400 games Yasuo player is better.
Every single time.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Right?
Every single time. I would much rather teach the guy who wants to play Yasuo and will never quit than the guy who's going to play 10 games of Annie and just be like, sorry, coach.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think it's important to note that if a player really genuinely has no idea, right, what they want to play, right, then I think as a fallback, picking a simple champion is probably going to be the simplest way to start getting access to the fundamentals and doing something, right?
Because getting agency by learning the fundamentals is going to be one of the fun things.
Yeah. It's definitely going to be probably the most fruitful approach. But, I mean, it's very clear from this book that the fruitful approach is not what Josh Weisskin took at first.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
So, definitely it's,
even
if there is a champion,
fast,
if there is a champion that you like, stick with that. Don't worry about anything else.
Yeah, I see it all the time, too. It's like people just being really unsure of themselves about, like, what they're doing, and people go this thing, start going like, hey, am I playing the right champion? Should I be playing a different champion? And I always feel really bad because like people have this echo chamber about them. Like, no, you literally are not allowed to play Yasuo until you were like master tier.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, come
Bruh.
on.
Hyper, bruh.
Well, the streaming community doesn't have that regard. With people saying like, you shouldn't be playing Lee Sin unless you're like high master. I'm like,
no, I'm gonna play Lee Sin no matter what rank I am, dude. You can't stop me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna suck at Lee Sin, sure. But
the thing is, though, is like, imagine if. I think the thing is that given the same number of games on Annie versus like a Lee Sin, you probably know a little bit more about the fundamental. But like, I think that the argument that you can't learn fundamentals on a mechanically intensive champion is just dead wrong, personally.
No, 100% it is. Yeah. It's a matter of that. Yeah, you go for it. Yeah.
It's a matter of looking for the on the right, because you can like a mechanically intensive champion is going to be mechanically intensive, but you can like take a step back from that and just look at fundamentals, even just abstract the kit once you know it.
Yeah,
the fundamentals are still there.
Yeah, it's just a matter of like if playing the champion and like thinking about what combo you need to do and like, you know, how do you need to like control them is taking 100% of your mental effort, then yeah, that's going to preclude you from thinking about the larger game and the minion wave and what your lane assignments should be and where your macro should be and your map awareness. All of those things are going to suffer as a result of your full attention being necessary to pilot the champion, right? But if you get to the place where you can pilot the champion properly and it doesn't take a whole bunch of mental effort, yeah, sure, it might take 100 games, but once you get there, it's fine, right? It's just that initial ramp-up time where you're learning to play the champion is going to be longer, right? So, you know, I think the only thing that you can really do that's actually going to give you problems is playing like 60 games each of every mechanical intensive champion in the game, right? You know, that's going to be bad, right? But if you have a love for it and you stick with it, then it's totally fine. It's just, as long as you love them enough to be willing to go through 100 games of learning them, yeah, it's fine. It's no problem at all.
I completely agree with you on that. And I sort of kind of wish I took that advice. As much as I liked playing Annie, it wasn't that way at first. I just kind of like I picked Annie because that's what people tell you to do. Is you just pick Annie, play mid, push waves, and you learn the game, which is decidedly incorrect. Of course, I came to find out that no, in fact, playing lane and pushing waves does not teach you how to play League of Legends very well.
Yeah. You know what does? Asking questions.
You know what does? Learning.
Yeah, learning the game.
And then eventually what happened was because I think that I always wanted to be an AD carry player, but because I had this strange idea that I had to play Annie mid to get better at the game so I could be good at AD carry. But instead, what happened was I started playing AD carry and I fed hundreds of games, but I still having infinitely more fun.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it was infinitely more frustrating because I was dying a whole bunch because I didn't know what I was doing, I still had infinitely more fun when I popped off on an AD carry versus when I popped off on Annie. So I kind of stuck with it, and the fact that I made that decision was probably the best decision I made in my League career, I think.
Yeah. There are some people for whom joy is the number of auto attacks that they get to do in a fight. Whereas for other people, the amount of joy is the length of time that it takes for somebody's health bar to go from 100 to 0. And if that time is 0 seconds, then that is where they are at their happiest.
It's funny because it's going to sound really dumb because you hear me complain about this all the time.
Sure.
My favorite thing in League is sort of like being on the razor's edge between popping off and getting a pentakill and just straight dying because you're like 100 units too close. And if you guys have heard me complain 100 times, I'm like, oh my god, I can't believe that actually hit me. That's really crappy range. But I love being on that razor's edge of like
stupid,
just perfectly tethering skill shots and then just like getting a quadra kill is just like the best feeling for me.
It is.
And like sort of just having to maneuver and be super careful and But it's so funny because I still get really frustrated when I screw up on that stuff. So it's like it's just funny.
Yeah. So I don't know. I've shared many times that my favorite place to be in League of Legends is slingshotting directly onto 4 people as Zac and becoming invincible. that's my happy place. I am a man that likes to go in. I like that moment when I engage.
I actually had the Twitch stream the other day in a lane where I got a triple kill with a single E.
Oh my god.
That's
pretty satisfying.
I had 6 stacks on 3 people.
That's one thing.
6 stacks on 3 people, get 3 all at once. I'm like,
Gimme.
Yeah,
now that's the dream. Not even the 1v5 flank pentakill. No, it's like getting 3 people with an expunge.
Agreed.
My happy place in League is cyberbullying people. I'm the jungler.
Your happy place in League
Pepe.
is Kenobi.
Good God. I'm raising a psychopath. Anyway.
That's funny.
We'll move on from that one. Another thing that I think is really interesting is this quote here. For me, competitive chess was not about perfection. It was more of a mental prize fight with 2 opponents trading advantages, momentum going one way than the other. My friends in Washington Square were valiant competitors, and you could never count them out. In fact, they were most dangerous when on the ropes. Many very talented kids expect to win without much resistance. When the game was a struggle, they were emotionally unprepared. Fixed mindset on full display in these young kids, right? You tell them they're smart, you tell them they're good at the game, and when they start struggling or losing, it's just cognitive dissonance. I'm good at the game. What does it mean to lose? It doesn't make sense. Right? And it's like, I'm sure we've seen this in tons of people everywhere, right? But
hey, I don't appreciate the personal
it's the first personal attack of the day,
right? So,
I mean, yeah, I definitely read myself there as a person who, like, it's not that I hate losing. It's just that, like, when I don't understand why I lost, then it's like, my brain just is like, I don't understand. Like, I just don't get it. Like, I felt like I was doing everything right, but clearly I wasn't. Right? So it's like, I can get that. And especially because, if somebody who's an adult has troubles with that, imagine how much trouble somebody who's 8 or 9 has, especially because they don't have, the breadth of experience to deal with that kind of emotion. So it's got to be really hard.
Yes. Yeah, right. So, it's. I'm sure that we'll hear more later in the book on how to develop this kind of a mindset, but I think this does illustrate that, like, this is what you're aiming for, right? And to kind of go back to peak, I think a lot of it comes down to how you get raised as a kid, right? It's, do you get praised for effort? Do you get praised for results, right? And if you get praised for effort and hard work, and it's expected that mistakes are going to happen and that there's something to learn from, and it's like, if that's the mindset that you grew up with, then, you don't really fall into this trap of, like, it has to be perfect, right? And if you do, that can be more limiting than anything, right? I mean, it's the same sort of thing as, like, we were talking about with the champions, right? Like, if you're a perfectionist and then you can't achieve perfection immediately, and then you quit because you can't achieve perfection immediately, you're not going to end up ever reaching perfection, right? So paradoxically, in order to reach mastery, you have to be okay not being perfect, right? You have to understand that there's going to be a very, 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 very long period where you don't play perfectly. In fact, you play quite poorly, but that's okay because you're moving towards it, right? So it's this shows that even from a very early age, right, his mindset was in a really, really good spot, right? I think we have to thank his parents for that. We have to thank his upbringing.
It's kind of cool seeing that sort of pop up in that way. I mean, for me, it's a challenge to not feel terrible about that, and I think that's in part, sort of the way I was raised, or not raised by my parents. My parents were always really, really supportive of mistakes, but at some point internally, I think with school and I struggled with holding a job and
American
sort
school
of like I
system,
really
good God.
internalized that sort of shame. That's like, if I can't do it perfectly, what's the point of doing it at all? But then
relatable. Oh my God, relatable.
But then.
Remember,
Doesn't seem to matter how bad I play.
We're doing fully.
But then it never seemed to matter how bad I played. No matter how angry I got, I'd want to play the next day. It wouldn't matter how mad I got at myself or how bad I was, because I just wanted to be better. I didn't really care. It didn't really occur to me why or how I wanted to. I just had this incredibly strong drive to just get really good at this game, and
yeah, so, he talks about the same thing with his early chess career. He was like, it's just like I approached it with an intensity that I still can't really explain. He says, like, I would call it a calling, but I don't want to, because I don't really know how to explain what that means.
Yeah, that's sort of the thing I have with League, and it's just sort of like, it's funny because I quit a lot of things that I try to start with because I'm not immediately good. But with League, it was different. It didn't matter. I just wanted to keep trying.
They look good. They're organic. I love them.
So I can really relate to him there. But then, trying to get good at League, you have to develop a growth mindset at some point, or else you'll never actually get there.
Yep.
And so that's what I'm working on, and it's a long road, but I'm definitely getting there, I think.
Definitely. And honestly, like, even just in these past couple of days, as you've started to apply more of that mindful learning stuff, I think that's made a huge difference for you, right? In a lot of ways, it seems like that was, like, you sort of knew that you had a fixed mindset, but you didn't know what to do about it, right? And, like, this has kind of opened up and shown you what it means to go back to another point that we made, right? The difference between don't have a fixed mindset and have a growth mindset, right?
Right.
Asking questions is what allows you to have a growth mindset.
And when you have that sort of mindful learning opportunities, and you don't see the rules as fixed, it's almost like your brain's forced to ask questions and forced to sort of look at these things with the growth mindset, and it's just like. Yeah, I think that's a really good point that I never really thought about. Maybe it wasn't that I never thought I could get better. It's just that I didn't understand what it meant to be different. Which is kind of weird because, like, I think a lot of these things people expect to be self-explanatory in a way.
Yeah.
Like they're not really. There's so many things that you've told me you've taken for granted.
Yeah.
That you didn't know that I didn't know about.
Yeah.
Until I was like, oh, look at this thing I discovered. And you're like, wait, well, I've been doing that for years. And if I had known that you had struggles with this, I would have told you about this.
Yeah. 100%.
And that's happened, 3 or 4 times now. So
if not 5 or 6 times, at least.
Oh, yeah. It's like a monthly thing.
At least every month. At least every month. God. Yeah. And so much that I don't know that I know.
Yeah, and I'm starting to finally catch up, and I'm not necessarily climbing, but I still get frustrated about how I'm losing, or how I don't feel like I'm as good as I want to be, but I feel like I actually am seeing meaningful progress that's sticking. Even if sometimes I say I don't have any progress, I can still see progress. So. For sure.
I am back. Sorry, my died.
Oh, we didn't even notice.
I'm glad that you're still here.
Yeah.
I thought I was just dominating the conversation. I'm glad that it was just that you were gone.
Yeah. Josh goes on to say, I thrived under adversity. My style was to make the game complex and then work my way through the chaos. When the position was wild, I had huge confidence. Bruce and I also spent a lot of time studying endgames, where the board is nearly empty and high-level principles combined with deep calculations to create fascinating battles. While my opponent wanted to win the openings right off the bat, I guided positions into complicated middle games and abstract endings. So as the game went on, their confidence shrank and I became a predator. This was something that absolutely captured me when I first read this book. I was like, study endgame first. It's backwards. What does it mean to do this, right? And I like started thinking about like, okay, like how can I do that, right? And what I came to realize was that endgame was not the piece I should have focused on in this passage. Instead, the thing that I should have focused on in this passage was where the board is nearly empty and high-level principles combined with deep calculations to create fascinating battles. That's actually the key word here. When you look at chess, right, you start with the maximum number of pieces on the board that will ever exist in the game. The game only gets simpler in terms of number of pieces from that point. In League of Legends,
it's the opposite.
It's the opposite. You start right? You start in lane. You start in lane where there are fewer pieces, and then you move up and up into mid-game and end-game where people start roaming around and it's more pieces, and you got to consider a larger space, right? So, for a while I said to myself, this means we should focus endgame first and then work our way backwards from there, start with macro, team compositions, this kind of stuff. And what I've found is that that's not as effective, right? In League of Legends specifically, although perhaps, memorized openings and like, I'm going to push this many minions on this wave and, that kind of stuff I think is still pretty bad, right? But starting with the laning phase and starting with even like 1v1s, right, I think is a really fantastic way to learn the game because you do get a lot of those principles of like, okay, this is kind of roughly what's going on here and there's so much in macro and in team compositions that mirror just basic lane matchups and basic positioning in lane and all that kind of different stuff, right? There's a lot of different parallels that you could draw, and one-on-ones are by far the simpler variant of it. So I think that one of the things that League of Legends community does right is you really focus hard on the laning phase, because as you continue to learn more about the laning phase and the simplest parts of the game, and you start to distill these principles, the mid and late game almost become too easy. You know what I mean? It's like, if you're ahead coming into mid and late game, well, yeah, you just take Baron and win the game. It's like you don't even really, you almost don't even need to talk about, like there are some principles that you need to know there, but once you know them, the execution actually tends to be quite simple. And the meat of the game, where battles are won and lost, tends to occur earlier and earlier and earlier as you advance in skill, right? You look at a lot of lower elo games, and they go really long, right? And the game is decided in these like super late game team fights around Baron or even around the Nexus, and it really is actually like a back and forth battle for a lot of that time, right? Whereas you look at like, I mean, I don't know, like let me just pull a random game out of here, like IGSKT Last Worlds, right? Where right, where a certain jungler happened to go like 7-0 in the first like 8 minutes of the game, and the game just ended at like 12 minutes. It's like you don't see that.
It was like also the
every lane won. It was insane, right? But like these sorts of takeovers, yeah, right.
Oh, that game, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you will not see that kind of a game happen in low elo. It just doesn't happen. People, I mean, like you'll see people get unbelievably fed for sure, but you will not see people end the game in 13 minutes unless somebody opens, right? I mean, but like,
yeah, I've had a game today where we ended at 10 minutes.
Yeah, right. Like games get faster as you get higher on the ladder, and the reason for that is that
it just reopened.
Yeah, it's like the real complexity of the game is in the early game.
Well, when you think about it too, it's like compounding advantages are a thing in chess too. Yeah. It just does the opposite. It's that compounding advantages means you lose stuff. They have less stuff than you have. Like they have 3 pieces to your 2, or like they have 2 pieces to your 1, or whatever. But it's like in League, your compounding advantages are about building yourself up rather than taking away from them. Right? So it's like. And I think that's
in
really
League,
kind of like, it's so funny because people say chess and League are very much similar, and it's like they kind of are in a really weird mirrored way. That's sort of like they're so similar in terms of like the way you think about tactics and strategy, but they're literally exact opposites when you think about how they function in terms of early, mid to late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the whole idea of like, yeah, the act of trading, right? And I don't mean trading in the League of Legends. I'm trading with them. My HP, both of our HPs are getting lower. It's not that. It's like trading an objective, right? In League of Legends, trading a tower for a tower, right? In League of Legends, that actually brings you closer to even, not closer to. It doesn't. It favors the team that's behind, not the team that's ahead. In chess, if two people trade pieces, it favors the person who has more pieces, because eventually you just get to. I have 3 pieces and you have none, right?
There are minor exceptions depending on like the material, but I mean, in like 95% of cases, I would say that's
depending on the piece values.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah. And like, the reason for that, I think it's really important to talk about the reason for that. The reason for that in League of Legends is when you trade objectives, you know, when we think about power in League of Legends, it's not actually measured in number of objectives. It's measured in the strength of the champions on both teams, right? And when it's measured in the strength of the champions on both teams, right? Both teams get roughly the same amount stronger if they trade similar objectives, right? If I take a tower and you take a tower, both of us got 300 gold, right? But what that means then is if there's like a gap in the amount of gold that two teams have, right? When you add a flat amount of gold to both totals, the amount that the one team is ahead is now a smaller percentage of the total gold that's in the game. And this is something that I've been struggling to kind of actually like communicate for a long time, right? But it's like, you know, it's like if I have this much gold and then the other team has like that much gold, right? Then like they have twice as much gold as me, right? But if then we each add the same amount of gold on, right? Now they have you know, I have, you know, 2 gold and they have 3 gold, right? You know, the gap between us has stayed the same size, but it's now a smaller percentage of the total thing. So
yeah, because as you get higher, the percentages change, right? It's like 100 over 50
mm-hmm.
is bigger than 150 over 100.
Yeah.
And then you also have to think too that like there is an upper ceiling for how strong someone can get, and that ceiling is level 18 and 6 items.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of what your scalings are, once you get to level 18 and have 6 items, you are literally never getting any stronger.
Nasus, Viker. But yes, for the most part, true.
Okay. Outside of infinite scaling, which was my point,
yes.
I think, what I meant to say.
Yes.
But yeah, so like 95% of the time, you're never going to get any stronger than that. And so what that means is that like there's almost like this asymptote sort of like threshold where gold literally means nothing, and that's sort of hard for people to really grasp. That is that the reason why gold starts to mean less is not necessarily because of the ratio of gold. I mean, that's definitely part of it, but it's because there comes a point where you literally cannot spend your gold on anything else, really. So
I'm gonna sell my boots for a Phantom Dancer. Okay, does that help? Maybe.
And it's like, yeah, maybe you're kind of stronger. I don't know, but like,
yeah.
PvP is actually quite good.
I mean, yeah.
It is. I do that a lot, but like, I mean,
but you're losing the movement
speed.
The
point is, once you swap out. Oh, so it's funny actually. You tend to have pretty much the same amount of movement speed with 3 Zeal items as you do with 2 Zeal items and boots, and I don't know why it works out that way, but it's pretty close.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that.
And I think it's because it's like 21% movement speed overall or something like that versus the 45 or something, and so it's like it ends up equaling out. It's really weird. It's really weird, and I don't really understand the math behind it, but that's as far as I understand. I'll have to look into that. Yeah. But yeah, there comes a point where gold just stops being worthwhile, and the later and later you get into the game, the less worthwhile gold is, and so that even says, you know, even more that like you're incentivized to try to just, you know, as soon as you get ahead, you just start clamping down and end the game as fast as you can, so that they can't close that power gap.
Yep.
Whereas in chess, I think you're incentivized to make the game go as long as you can, so that you can close the power gap through effective maneuvering and trading and stuff like that. I think he even makes an example of a game that he makes last longer just so that he can trade out a knight to get a 2-king endgame and then win off of that because he got a draw.
Yep, that was I think in the next chapter.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we should probably get in there. Another thing that I think is interesting, right, is he mentions, I was unhindered by internal conflict, a state of being that I have come to see as fundamental to the learning process. Again, really strongly echoes a lot of what you see in the mental game of poker, right? When you're upset or confused or experience any kind of negative emotion or stress, that shuts down higher brain function, right? It's a physiological effect. You can't stop it. And so when you have a bunch of internal conflict about what you're supposed to be doing and you're getting stressed out, that's going to make your mind go blank, right? And you're going to have a hard time. So he's not wrong. There are scientific reasons that this experience that he had makes sense, and almost everyone is going to find
it's pretty much a universal experience too. So
exactly. So
I think we've all had that,
for sure.
Yeah, but most people can't. Said, I don't know why I did that.
Yeah, there's like, I tilted. That means I must play a little bit less. That mean I need a break. Maybe that's part of it.
Breaks. Speaking of breaks, there's a really interesting part about that in the next chapter.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
So
good. I'm a master at it. I'm unbelievable. I'm the best. Chapter 2, Losing to Win. So, in this, we're gonna have some fun in this chapter, right? So the first quote, right? He says, I had dealt with the pressures of being the favorite at the Nationals by puffing myself up with a sense of invincibility. Confidence is critical for a great competitor, but overconfidence is brittle. We are too smart for ourselves in such moments. We sense our mortality like a cancer beneath the bravado, and when things start to go out of control, there is little real resilience to fall back on. So here's my question to you two. Given what we know, now that we've spent however many months studying the mental game of poker, right? What are some things that we would say to a young Josh expressing these kinds of feelings to us?
About overconfidence?
Thank you, Dilga. Thank you. I'll reread the quote again. I had dealt with the pressures of being the favorite at Nationals by puffing myself up with a sense of invincibility. Confidence is critical for a great competitor, but overconfidence is brittle. We are too smart for ourselves in such moments. We sense our mortality like a cancer beneath the bravado, and when things start to go out of control, there's little real resilience to fall back on. So what can we say now that we've been spending time thinking about it, on how to develop the kind of real resilience that you would need in these sorts of situations? What are the sorts of things that you can do to start walking in that direction?
I think that the first thing to do is to understand that there's a time that things happen. It's sort of what Jade Hendler calls, it's sort of like a learning process, and sort of like you have to learn what it means to be overconfident and what it means, like what are the things that happens when someone is overconfident versus underconfident, and sort of like the processes that you go through, like sort of the process model, the injecting logic portion, and then like the mental hand history type stuff that really start to work through those sorts of issues, and then sort of figuring out how to do that. And then I think the next step after that is sort of to start really kind of digging into that logic, or like why those sorts of things make your body feel really unsafe in the moment, and then sort of figuring out and reconciling that with like, is that really a thing to be uncomfortable about? Like does me losing and me getting really mad that I lost because I should be better than that, which ironically enough is overconfidence and not underconfidence, like is that really something that that has to be a worrisome thing, or is there a way for me to sort of understand that if I lost, that just means that my skill is where it's at, and that's okay, right? So I think it's about learning how to defeat the fear inside of you, and really get your body feeling okay with these really uncomfortable circumstances. I think it's less of a conscious process than more than it is an unconscious process in terms of getting yourself there. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of conscious work you have to do, but that's not the goal. The goal isn't to be consciously understanding that will happen. It's to be.
It's to be feeling okay.
Right. Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, and so the another thing that I think is
I would have gone at it slightly different angle is that that feeling of invincibility. Why does it exist? Because he's been beating adult people and beating most people his age, and rated player, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that.
Yeah, highest rated player.
But he had never encountered someone that could have had a similar trajectory to him. Like he was the only person of his age that was this. So there was like no actual logic behind his invincibility. He had not tried it. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So like meeting someone that was good enough to beat him would be the first time that he had the opportunity to learn to play against someone his age and his skill to really improve.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I would say it's kind of difficult too because I think at this point Josh is still fairly young, so it's like sitting him down and having him like figure out mental hand history is probably going to be counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm. So
it's like I think that realistically it'd have to be more about sitting down with him and talking him through it in a less structured environment and just kind of like make sure that he understands that it's okay, that it's okay to feel bad. And it's okay to feel uncomfortable, and that as you start to work through these feelings, that if you are able to sort of work through them in I think a proper way, then those sorts of feelings will start to subside.
So the take that I would make on this is to recall the chapter on confidence in the mental game of poker. Kind of the first thing that he talks about is that the goal is to have stable confidence, right? It's not necessarily to feel totally invincible, and it's definitely not to feel like things are totally out of control and we're a complete failure, right? We want to be somewhere in between. In particular, we want our confidence to reflect our actual level of play, right? So the thing that you'll see here, right, is that he is actually the highest rated player in the group, right? So his confidence should be pretty darn high, right? It makes sense for that to be the case. If he was underestimating his abilities in that moment, then that could cause problems, right? He starts second guessing himself. He starts doing, he starts shying away from moves that are aggressive that he usually would take because he's, in all of this pressure, right? It actually does make sense for him to be fairly confident coming into it. What doesn't make sense is for him. The thing that I would take the most issue with is the word invincibility, right? Invincibility meaning nothing that I can possibly do is wrong, right? That, I think, is the core of the problem, right? The instant that you start disrespecting your opponents and thinking there's nobody here that can challenge me, there's nothing here that I need to worry about, there's no danger at all, right? That's when you start getting into this place where if something starts to go wrong, you can't understand it, right? Because you put yourself in a position where you started to say to yourself, okay, there's no danger here, right? I don't even have to worry about this because there's no danger at all, right? There is some danger. There's always a danger in competition. You never can prepare fully for all of your opponents. And so I would say the thing to do here would be to imagine, what I would do with Josh is I would visualize what are some ways that things can go wrong, right? When you're playing versus adults, what are some of the things that you tend to struggle with? And make sure to keep those weaknesses in check, right? To have a clear understanding of this is where my game is right now, and these are some things that I could potentially struggle with if there happens to be another prodigy at this tournament, right? And by keeping those always in mind, right, but at the same time acknowledging that he is the highest rated player and that a lot of the games likely will be very easy, he can develop a, like we say, a stable confidence, right? It actually is high confidence, but it's not a feeling of invincibility. It's a feeling of self-assuredness, right? And that, I think, is going to be what's going to give him the best chance to play his best game on game day.
So you're saying is it sort of like the same thing that I kind of said, but like kind of like a proactive thing rather than a reactive thing, where it's like, okay, so since you feel this way, let's take a look at some of the things that might go wrong ahead of time, rather than saying, well, you feel this way afterward. What made you feel that way, and then let's talk about it.
Yeah, it's prepare him for the match by allowing him to experience some of the potential problems that he could get into ahead of time, right? We talk about the idea of like visualization as kind of a way to sort of mimic experience, right?
Yeah.
And so if we can allow him to experience a milder version of falling behind in a game beforehand by visualizing it and thinking about it and imagining all the different ways that could happen, then that will put a dent in his confidence. Hopefully it doesn't totally deflate it, right? We don't want him to sink all the way to the bottom and feel like, oh my god, I have so many problems that I need to work on. We only want to cover the top one or two things that have been giving him issues, and just remind him that those are still issues in his game and that there are still things that can go wrong. Kind of like we were talking about with the syllabus when we were working on that yesterday, right? It's the idea of understanding what the common problems are, and ahead of time, coming up with some solutions to those, so that we can, kind of in the moment, we have a logic injection ready, right? As opposed to being unprepared for even the possibility of things going badly, right? So, to sum up, become more familiar with the situation, right? He talks about how he's so familiar with being on the ropes, right? He just hadn't been on the ropes against a kid before, right? So to mentally beforehand be like, there's a possibility that there's another strong player at this tournament and that I get on the ropes. I think immediately he starts to get into a position where he's not feeling so overconfident that when something starts to go wrong, it feels like a death spiral.
Yeah, and it sort of speaks to the idea that humans crave familiarity. You know what I mean?
Yes.
If they don't so it's like it's not that it's a bad situation; it's just an unfamiliar one. Mm-hmm. And until it becomes familiar enough that it doesn't feel as bad, you need to sort of get your body used to what it means to be on the ropes versus somebody you've never been on the ropes against before. And it totally makes sense that he's going to just completely fall apart in that situation because he never had to deal with that before. Never.
Mm-hmm. And I think, too... Go for it.
And that sort of makes me, and it's partly an overconfidence problem because, you think that you're better than them, you're not going to have any problem, but it's also like I guess it's just a sort of a foresight issue too, where it's like, had he spent maybe a little bit of time thinking about what might go wrong, then maybe he wouldn't have ever been overconfident at all. Maybe it actually might have been just an unfamiliarity. I think that being overconfident definitely fueled those emotions for sure, though. So
yeah, and you can look at a similar way to address underconfidence, right? If somebody's coming in and they're getting cold feet and they just don't believe in themselves, the way that you're going to have the best chance to deal with that is to remind yourself of all of your successes, right? Think about all the things that have been going right for you lately and, the progress that you've made and to remind yourself that there are parts of your game that are good, even if you feel like you're struggling right now, and to remember to rely on those, right? And the skills in your game that are solid are going to continue to remain solid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to take kind of comfort in that, right, is another thing that can be done.
Definitely.
And just to kind of bring this back to League of Legends, right? Tons of people all the time, including some of them that are in this room, have issues with when they fall behind, getting into this death spiral of feeling like, what even, right? You know? And I think the same advice applies.
Me, right?
Yeah, no, couldn't possibly be you. No way.
Not.
Under no circumstances can it be you.
I always am confident in my ability to get it from behind.
When I describe you to other people, I describe you as confident. So,
confident?
I describe you as confident. Stable, and very confident.
It was very stable, genius. That's
very
me.
Stable, very confident, self-assured, genius. never nervous,
No.
never having any trouble. So, given that these are the sorts of people in the room, I don't even know that we need to talk about this, but so when we go into League of Legends, right? If you're struggling with feeling really uncomfortable when you fall behind, right? Maybe one of the things that would be really helpful would be to, before the game even starts, right, think about what are the common, not necessarily what do I need to do to enable my own win condition, what do I need to do to make sure that I get fed. Instead, think about what are the sorts of things that the enemy can do that'll really mess me up, right? And how would I need to react in those sorts of situations in order to still be okay? Right? And if you start to become a little bit more familiar with, here are the different things that go wrong, and if they go wrong in this way, what do I need to do? Then that situation stops feeling so alien, it stops feeling so completely impossible to deal with, and you start to be able to piece your game back together even when things start to go south.
I agree with you definitely, and I think that another thing to think about too is like, if the idea of Douglas Brackman and sort of, I guess even Jared Tendler kind of gets at it too, where it's like, if the idea is, the problem isn't that like I don't know what to do, the problem is I'm unfamiliar with what it means to be behind. Mm-hmm. Maybe then part of it is I need to have contingency plans for when I'm behind, but also I should probably start to really kind of mentally rehearse how it feels to be behind. Mm-hmm. So that like when I die in an early TV2, I don't just start going monkey mode like, oh my god, this game's over. Yeah. Sort of like, okay, let's just like, no, we're just gonna farm under turret. It'll be fine. We'll be fine.
This is an opportunity to practice playing from behind and coming back like, from a deficit.
I've done this a million times. I don't need to worry about this.
Yeah, it's okay. And feeling familiar first and comfortable second, I think, are things that can make playing from behind less painful for a lot of players. And so, if you are out there and you struggle with feeling totally doomed every time you get behind, maybe it's time to start thinking about what are the sorts of things that you can do to come back when you're from behind. And that can even help your game from even too, right? Because if you're spending your whole time from even worrying about being behind, then that's gonna cause issues, and you're gonna get a fear response. Your mind's gonna go blank, right? So,
I think a lot of us, me included, kind of just feel best when we're just like ahead. It doesn't matter how far ahead we, like it's like the default state of being for us is ahead. It's not even, right? So it's like getting familiar with those things will really help.
Yeah, understanding a little bit better how you're supposed to play when you're even, and how you're supposed to play when you're behind, that will help you to get ahead more often, because you'll be able to be comfortable in those spots.
And even like even like understanding what are the normal emotional responses that someone might have.
For sure.
Desperation of like forcing way too hard for things that you can't force, or hard shoving when you have really no reason to, or like trying to make
super
desperado roams, like
super duper.
Knowing how you manifest that unfamiliarity, and then how to become more familiar with what it feels to be behind, and Having a contingency plan, I think those are the three big things I would take away.
Yeah. So, if we just take those three that you mentioned, right? Desperation plays manifesting as all-inning, shoving the wave, or roaming, right? What can we suggest as potential like stock responses to perhaps dying early on in lane, right? What are the sorts of things that we want to be doing proactively in those sorts of situations when we've fallen behind?
So when you're behind, the most important thing is to not push the wave. You literally just let the wave keep coming into you. Literally, that's the one thing I would say is that, because here's the thing, right? Because it's not going to happen in like bronze, silver, gold, and like maybe low to mid plat. But like people in high and like I guess even like low and mid plat sometimes do it, but not super often. But like I've had experiences in high plat games where Atherton knows this when we duoed is I got a little bit behind and so I started shoveling because I was like I don't know what to do, and then I had to have Atherton come and break 2 freezes on me in the same game just so I could like get some farm, right? And so like just giving up some minions and letting the wave push into you is going to be I think the most important thing, because if you can allow that to happen, then you never really have to worry about losing a ton of HP unless they like dive you or something. But like,
and there's a follow-up to that is that when you're behind, the thing that makes you not be behind is having the tower and the minions to compensate your weak.
Defender's advantage.
And then the other thing too, right, is like I would say looking for really high value trades and interactions with them where it's like, yeah, you may be behind, but even if they have a component on you, there are situations where most of the time you can even win it 2-2 if they like really mess it up. Like I'm a Caitlyn and I just use my Q and E on the farm a minion wave, and we're both level 6. Like there's nothing you can do anymore in an all-in fight, right?
Understanding their moments of vulnerability, understanding what the mistakes are that they can make, and how you can capitalize on them. And that's going to change with the champions, it's going to change with the lanes, it's going to change with the matchups. But these are questions that you can start asking, right? What are the mistakes that they can make, and how do I punish them, right? And those, I think, are 2 questions that are very, 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 very important to ask when you're behind. Because I think the biggest mistake that people make when they get behind is then trying to play like they are still even or still ahead, right? And they try to make proactive movements, and they get antsy and they try to go, right? However go manifests for them, right? But in almost all situations when you're behind, waiting tends to be the right move. And I wanna make an interesting point here about the difference between waiting and doing nothing, right? When I suggest waiting to students, a lot of times they say, I don't want to do nothing. It doesn't make sense. It feels really bad, right? I want to reframe the difference between those. Waiting is an action. It is an action that you intentionally make to do nothing for a discrete period of time. Waiting implies that you are waiting for something. So when you wait...
you have a queue primed or...
Yeah, exactly. When you wait, figure out what you're waiting for, right? Identify the mistake that you need them to make in order for you to punish it and come back into the game. Identify what itemization you need to have in order to start to be able to fight back against them, right? Figure out what your out is.
It's almost like in D&D when you're holding an action.
Yes.
Right? You're like, I'm going to hold an action and cast Fireball when I see this thing happen.
Precisely.
Right? So like you have like this plan going, and so like for League, holding an action might be, I'm behind. That's okay. I'm going to look for really efficient trades when their support is too far back and Caitlyn has no Q or something like that.
Precisely. And so if you can actually verbalize that, right? If you can say out loud, these are the things that I'm looking for, then that can help you to not feel like you're doing nothing when you're waiting, right? Because you're not doing nothing. You are intentionally waiting because you don't have agency in that moment. You can't just do whatever you want. You have to wait for them to do something. But then once they do that thing, that's your moment. And if you were waiting properly, then the instant that it happens, you pounce on it and you get back into the game, right? But if you're doing nothing, by contrast, if you're not waiting and you're just doing nothing, then
Then
when
you'll
that
never-
moment comes,
yeah.
you won't recognize it, and you'll just continue to play, and you'll continue to fall further behind, and it'll be terrible, just like you're imagining. So, yeah, just that difference between doing nothing and waiting. Wait.
It's a really
Don't do
important,
nothing.
I think, distinction for me specifically, because I think in a lot of cases, I'm behind, I'm just gonna sit here and farm, nothing else really. And then it's like, and then after the game, I look at it and I'm like, look at all these things I could have abused despite being 600 gold behind.
Yeah. So,
So
yeah. In support of waiting intentionally. To bring us to the next quote, he asks some questions. Was I a loser? So he ends up losing the match, right? Was I a loser? Had I let my parents down? What about the guys in the park? Bruce, my friends at school? How could I have lost? One of the problems with being too high is that there's a long way to fall. Had I fallen in my own eyes, or also in the eyes of those around me? After trying so hard, was there any worth outside of winning? An 8-year-old is hardly prepared to deal with such loaded issues. Again, I'd like to ask, how might we respond through the lens of the mental game of poker, right? To these sorts of questions, right? And to just kind of start it off, I'd like to rephrase them instead of as questions. We'll rephrase them as statements, and then we will let's just do mental hand history about it, right? And kind of go through some common sorts of things, right? So, was I a loser? Let's rephrase that as I am a loser, right? The second thing, have I let my parents down? I have let my parents down, right? The parents / others, right? Third, I have let myself down, right? And then fourth, there is no worth outside of winning after trying hard, right? So for each of these things, right? When you have just lost a very important tournament match, why does it make sense for you to feel like a loser?
Because you've lost?
Because you lost, yes.
Right.
because you didn't meet your expectations of winning the tournament.
You didn't meet your expectations. Yeah. Perhaps because the opponent laughed at you. You lost, right? The opponent laughed at you, called you a loser, right? So these are all reasons. The reasons this makes sense, right? So these are reasons that it makes perfect sense to feel this way, right? And yet, right? What's wrong with the logic in each of these statements, right? Does losing make you a loser?
Well,
No.
is this a trick question?
I don't know, right? So, I mean, let's talk about it, right?
What's being a
You're
loser?
technically a loser,
Being
right?
a loser is like never winning.
Right,
Not being
exactly.
able.
Mm-hmm.
Losing a game doesn't mean you're a loser. It means you've lost a game.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Losing one game means that you lost one game, right? So this kind of gets at the at one of the biggest problems with just general human psychology is that we're really, really fantastic, like unbelievably fantastic. Like our entire body is designed to recognize patterns, right? And so when you lose a game, you project into the future that you will lose all games from now until the end of time. And that's the way that you're feeling, right? You don't feel bad because you've lost one game. You feel bad because you're a loser and you're going to lose every game from now into infinity, right? So, in the moment, right? One of the things that can help you to feel less like a loser is to remind yourself, hey, I've lost 500 games this season, and guess what? I've won 470 games this season. So even if I'm down 30 games, I have still won a ton of games, right? And that means that I'm not a loser. I'm going to win games in the future. I'm going to lose games in the future. And if I can continue to take something out of the game, then I increase my chances of winning more in the future, and I make sure that I'm not a loser. Right? You didn't meet your expectations, right? So, starting from the point of that being unacceptable, right? How can you think about it in a different way, right? Is there anything actually wrong with not meeting your expectations?
Well, when you put a lot of energy into trying to reach something and then you don't, it does feel really bad.
It does.
But I think one of the things to remember then is that like it's like if you lose, the world isn't over, right? You know, within an hour, you know, you're going to be at home watching Netflix or whatever, or eating your dinner, and that chess game, it's gonna still sting, but in all likelihood, I mean, this game's a little bit different because it's like a world stage game, but, you know, if you're in a world where a year passes, will that game have made any real impact on your life? And a lot of League games, it's like, you won't even remember the game next month, let alone next year, right?
For sure.
Something like that, it may take a little longer to feel okay about it, but understanding that the world does go on and that the life isn't over because we lost the world chess game. And that, you know, there are learning experiences from this where it's like, well, I learned that I don't know how to deal with this experience, so that next time this happens at the next finals, I will know what to do.
I think another thing that I think is really important to talk about when we talk about like not meeting expectations, right, is that in all walks of life, right, in all fields, in all disciplines, you control your effort, not your results, right? So, you know, if you felt like you tried as hard as you possibly could, and you felt like you gave it 100%, then that's okay, right? I think that the key thing here is to reframe your expectations, right? The only thing that it makes sense to, and this is the same thing that I was talking about with confidence, right? The only thing that it makes sense to expect is what actually happens, right? So if you expect yourself to only win and then you lose, then yeah, no, you're gonna have violated your own expectations, and that's gonna feel bad. And it's never gonna feel good to violate your own expectations. That's like literally the definition of disappointment is having an expectation and having it not being fulfilled, right? So you're always going to be disappointed if you continue to expect that from yourself. Instead, change your expectations. The only thing that you can expect from yourself is effort. You can't expect results. So when you start expecting effort, and you stop expecting results, and you start acknowledging that results are going to fluctuate, and that's just the name of the game, right? Everyone has a range in their performance, and some days you're going to play well, some days you're going to play poorly, and that's fine, right? Then when you have a bad game, it doesn't violate your expectations anymore. You expect that you're going to lose some, right? And when you learn to expect that you're going to lose some, then losing doesn't feel as bad, right? Expect to lose some games, and you won't be disappointed, right? You are going to lose some games, right? So,
but it's also about... Okay, well, I'm gonna have to get going here soon. It's about time for me to go. I have to take my car in to get it fixed. So
yeah, we should probably start wrapping up.
But the thing I was my train of thought is lost. Okay, whatever. I'll probably remember it. So let's go on.
Yeah. So, again, reasons that it makes sense that you feel like a loser. The opponent laughed at you and they called you a loser, literally, right? So does that make you a loser, right?
Do they know?
What's that?
Do they know? Absolutely fucking.
Yeah.
Well, certainly I think it feels bad. I mean, I still get affected by people who say stuff to me in post-game chat like, this Twitch is so bad. And I'm like, I feel septic. I really didn't, yeah. And it's like, it certainly feels bad, but, you know, one of the things to remember is that, like, things that people say and things that people do, and even the biggest thing that I learned is that those things are all separate from who I am. Who I am is not what I think or feel, or it's not, you know, what happened. It's not whether I win or lose. It's not what people say about me. It's literally, you know, myself. It's literally only the sort of essence of what I like to call the kind of the observer mindset, where it's like the thoughts and feelings I have arise not because of me, but because of a certain sort of, I guess, either reaction to a stimulus or maybe like a chemical response or something, but it's not who I am, really. And so, like, understanding that, you know, I am different than all that stuff really kind of helps me to reframe what it means to be told that I'm bad, or what it means to lose a League of Legends game, or what it means to be stuck in Platinum. So that's really what helped me, I think, the most, is just developing that sort of observer mindset.
Yeah, the separation of ego and performance.
Yeah.
And learning to not define yourself by your performance, right? But rather by your effort, right?
I actually have this, you know, kind of funny anecdote too, where I was playing really bad in a ranked game, and Xerath, who was playing really well, struggling to kind of carry the game, and kind of the team was getting caught, and at one point, he just started just like going off on me in chat, because he was really upset about the fact that, you know, he was like 15-2 or something, and he wasn't able to carry the game, and then he was like, you should feel really, really bad about yourself as a human being right now, because you are really trash at this game. And then I think at that point I was like, I think the only thing I said was, I'm sorry that you're upset, but I don't put my emotional state, the well-being of my emotional state, into a League of Legends game, or something like that. And he said, that's why having bleeps like you on my team, because people like you just don't care about getting good. How can you get good if you don't care? And so it was kind of funny, because, like, if I think back to 6 months ago, that's probably how I would have reacted. Like, if you don't, you know, associate your emotional well-being with this game, what are you even doing? I mean, because the point's to win. The point isn't to feel good about what you're doing. But, and it's funny, because, like, in that moment, I really pitied him, because he clearly cared so much that he was willing to really kind of flame me because of the state of a ranked game on League of Legends. And it just sort of made me realize how people sort of get stuck in identifying as how they feel, rather than understanding that the way they feel is a response to what's happening, not because they are literally that feeling. And in that moment, I made the realization that, like, wow, I really have changed. You know what I mean? It's like you don't really realize how much that sort of mindset shift really means until you actually get there.
Yep. So we still have a bit left in this chapter, but I think that we'll just try to maybe we'll do one chapter next week, or maybe we'll do two and have enough time to go through the rest of this particular chapter. But I don't know.
These chapters have a lot to them, so
yeah, I would say let's try to go to continue it next week, and
okay,
we'll get through it. But you know, I think the idea of like doing MGOP analysis on this stuff is like so fun. Like I really enjoy doing this. So
yeah, book club is actually one of the things I look forward to the most during the week. Actually, now, so
right, it's so fun. It's so good. So
it's
to
really
close
cool
it up,
to be able to like kind of like take the things that I've unconsciously learned, or like can make connections and really kind of internalize some stuff that you read.
Yeah, it's cool stuff.
But yeah, I gotta get going, so I'll see you guys later. It was fun.
Before you go,
What?
can
What's up?
you share with us what's your biggest takeaway here from this week?
My biggest takeaway is probably about my affirmations about what it means to have a growth mindset, and also what are the connections I keep making between Douglas Brackman, between Timothy Galway, between Jerry Tendler, and then like Josh Weitzkin, and open focus and mindful learning, and sort of like all these things are really starting to like, it's almost like all these things are all interrelated in ways that are really profound to me about like these people are all saying the same thing in such radically different wording that it's really hard to tell that they're the same thing until you sort of
You get it,
look
until
really
it clicks.
closely.
Yeah.
And I think the difference between autopilot and flow and what it means to be an autopilot and flow and your attentional focus was really big for me too. And those are sort of the two things I'll be looking at this week, especially with the attentional sort of like lensing and what that means. Will be sort of like my kind of goal in this forthcoming week to sort of try to hammer out a bit.
Yeah. Autopilot versus flow and how scope of focus defines the difference. I think that's fantastic. Mr. Dilga, how about you? What are you taking out of this week?
I think the thing that I'm taking the most week, that I will remember the most out of this week, is the bit around Josh White, the feeling of invincibility and the issue of having just about the right amount of confidence when you're, especially when entering this kind of tournament games where you have a standing and you should be feeling confident, like more confident than the opponents, but like the ability to prepare for when metaphorical when things go bad. Make yourself familiar with how it's going to feel when it goes badly, because it eventually.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, me too. That was a good bit. Let's see. For me, I think probably the biggest takeaway is that I think that I don't put enough emphasis on asking questions when I coach. I think that that's not something that's unconscious enough competence for me. Yeah, I think that too often I just give the answer and I don't ask leading questions. I do it some, and I think I do it more than most. But I think it's something that I need to get even better at. Is making sure that asking questions.
As coaches do, where it's just like, but that's what I try to do with this. Like, I'm not giving you any answers. I'm just gonna make you draw it out of yourself. And if you have literally no idea, then yeah, sure. But I know that for when we do sessions, that would be much appreciated from me for sure. Because that's how I I think internalize these things.
Yeah.
But yeah. So that was I think we all got really big takeaways.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I think I'm more excited to finish reading this book than I was to finish reading Peak, because Peak just kind of got repetitive.
Yeah, I remember this game. Not this game. I remember this book ending a lot more interestingly. So.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, see ya. Thanks for the time.
Catch you around.
Have a good one, everyone.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.